EDCTP, or the European and Developing Countries Clinical Trials Partnership, as you know, is a public-public partnership that involves institutions both from Europe and from sub-Saharan Africa that are mandated by their governments in collaboration and with support funding from the European Union to support the acceleration of clinical interventions or medical interventions in the fight against poverty-related and neglected infectious diseases.
Well, the EDCTP investment is precisely to create a capacity in Africa, capacity for research on diseases which are related to poverty. My work is to sensitize member states, countries, African countries, to be more active in the research of solutions for this disease. The African countries, the African people, are those who are more affected by this disease. So they have to take the lead on that. And also change the paradigm of the past, where foreign research will come to the continent, do research, and then leave the continent without leaving capacity in Africa. We want to reverse that pattern. We need the cooperation of researchers from other continents, but it's a high time that African scientists take the lead.
South Africa is committed to the EDCTP program broadly, and since its inception we have supported the program. And at the heart of the program is about scientific research. Now, we all know that scientific research never progresses unless you have human capital and people who are driving the research, and therefore having the fellows for us helps us to develop the necessary capacity to fully benefit from the EDCTP program.
The Scientific Advisory Committee of EDCTP is so proud of what has happened from the investment in fellows in Africa, in research fellows. We see the new scientific leadership of Africa being born through career awards that go from very junior fellowship awards right through to senior awards that allow people to do research instead of getting pulled away into management positions and administrative positions. So we're quite excited by the whole Fellows program and by the launch of the network.
The EDCTP Africa office is responsible for the EDCTP Capacity Development Program. Over the years, we have trained over 500 scientists and clinicians in health research.
So one of the uniquenesses of EDCTP is our very strong focus on collaborative research. This is something that sets us aside from many other funding agencies. The focus on collaborative research means that within the majority of our projects, at least the larger projects, we have always both European research teams and African research teams within the same project, within the same consortium, working closely together, and therefore exchanging knowledge, personnel, and supporting each other in creating a critical mass of knowledge and capacity.
The 4 EDCTP research capacity fellowships are the industry placement fellowships. Then there's a second one, EDCTP RF fellowship. And there's a third one that we call career development fellowship. And the fourth one is senior fellowship. And the way they link into each other is that they follow the continuum of the training of a scientist from most junior level to most senior level.
I'm part of the first class of EDCTP senior fellows. The fellowship was to work on malaria drug development. It was trying to understand what was the public health benefit of new classes of anti-malarial drugs. The repetitive design that we introduced back then has now been adopted as pretty much a requirement for developing anti-malarial drugs in the field. I was just
a few years after my PhD when I started the fellowship. But now I'm an associate professor at the university.
I received a senior fellowship from the EDCTP in 2008. So the fellowship was on investigating immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome, which is a phenomenon that occurs when you're receiving antiretroviral therapy that have underlying infections, in this case schistosomiasis, which was prevalent in the area where I was working. The fellowship came very early in my career. I had just finished my PhD. I was 2-3 years into my PhD, very much in need of establishing a career, at the time getting small grants. So this was one of my main major breakthroughs at the time. From this funding and establishing a research group, I went on to establish an neglected tropical diseases research unit at the Center for Global Health at KEMRI in Kisumu. Which is now running independently of me because I am no longer at KEMRI. I also went on to, together with colleagues, to establish the African Research Network for Neglected Tropical Diseases, which is based in Kumasi and also progressing on its own now. We established the management and it's doing very well, providing small grants for neglected tropical diseases to young scientists in the region. And I then moved on to the World Health Organization, where I am now the focal point for schistosomiasis in the African region, supporting national control programs.
I received my senior fellowship in 2007, and this was for a project looking at a new diagnostic test for TB called Expert MTB-RIF. This is a molecular test to diagnose TB. It also identifies the presence of resistance to one of the key drugs for anti-TB therapy. And it was an advance over older diagnostics because it was much more rapid, much more sensitive, and we'd previously shown that in a number of studies. And the senior fellowship was really then to look at the next step, which is whether implementing this test as part of routine care and inpatient care can improve patient outcomes and also improve outcomes of the TB program. And in general, the findings were positive. So we identified that use of the test was associated with substantially reduced time to treatment, and that if we looked at the proportion of patients who were diagnosed with TB but didn't start TB treatment, that proportion was lower amongst patients who received the new TB diagnostic test.
I applied to EDCTP senior fellowship grant. One of the objectives was scientific. It was to find a way to have a very relevant and a tool to measure the impact of the exposure to parasites. The other objective was really to strengthen the malaria team. But another specific thing was also to allow us to train technicians, because the technician is the people who is in routine in the lab while students come and go. And if we don't have the sufficiently trained technicians, we can have problem to sustain the activity. This grant allows us to really recruit very brilliant persons. And one of these persons have been finally recruited by Institut Pasteur, which is really a great achievement.
I received the Career Development Fellowship of the EDCTP in 2005. The idea at the time was to prepare for trials of new TB treatments by looking at potential diagnostics that could, one, help you to better identify persons with latent TB infection. Now, the major findings really were that this new assay actually wasn't particularly useful for the purposes which we intended. Taking together grant experience, graduate degrees, and then having outputs and publications from my master's and PhD work, these sort of set me on the pathway to independence, improve my stature, so to say, as an early career researcher transiting to mid-level. And subsequently, I got more senior roles at the MRC, got a big grant portfolio from the Global Fund for TB epidemiology projects, which I ran successfully. And I think I owe a lot of that to the early foundation provided by the Career Development Fellowship.
I got EDCTP TDR Clinical Research Fellowship, and it's a kind of fellowship which allows a fellow to have industry-sponsored clinical research. It's a cross-cutting project which allowed me to have hands-on training, task-based learning by assignment. So I am basically joining phase 1, phase 2 study team at Novartis. And in this team, I have been supporting clinical trial leaders in terms of study initiation, study execution, and in any stage of the phase 1 and phase 2 studies. I can have the capacity to lead the implementation of early phase clinical trials in general.
So far, the fellowship program, EDCTP has funded 102 fellowships. That's in EDCTP 1 and EDCTP 2. We'll be sharing our online platform with the public soon, and we're very excited about that. We hope that this online tool will not just benefit our fellows and our networks of excellence, but that this tool becomes a way in which researchers across the continent can link together, can work and foster collaboration, share resources, and provide support to young and upcoming researchers in sub-Saharan Africa. We've also established 4 working groups. These are disease-specific, so far tuberculosis, HIV, malaria, and neglected infectious diseases and emerging infections. And we hope that these working groups will bring together brilliant minds and that activities within these working groups will help them come up with new ideas and solutions which the continent really needs.
There's always going to be more that needs to be done. Right now, we have laid the foundation by linking the different fellows and by also lighting the EDCTP regional networks of excellence, which is a perfect resource for the fellows to tap into should they need support with conducting clinical research or even clinical trials.
So the Scientific Advisory Committee is really keen to see this network, this alumni network, be active, be functioning. We may move forward with looking at thematic meetings that could bring together researchers that are involved in specific areas. We need to think how best we can support the network going forward, but it's definitely a priority for the Scientific Advisory Committee.
This alumni platform and network is made precisely to make African scientists, researchers, not only to share their experience, but also to encourage one another so that they can continue to work together, finding the solution for the challenges of the continent.